we'll have to write a paragraph. I can do that since it's my turn. Telling what was the most important or interesting insight our group gained from the discussion. So, if you guys want, I can go first. So talking about bias, I coach middle school wrestling, and there's a varsity lineup and a junior varsity lineup, and then guys that, or girls, that fill in as backups. And in a lot of sports like baseball and basketball, the coach, it's kind of up to the coach to set his lineup. But in wrestling, everything, the lineup is it's made up of weight classes, all the way from kids that weigh like 70 pounds. This is junior high, middle school, to kids that weigh up to 235 pounds, which there aren't a lot of anymore, at least around here. And there's about 18, 19 weight classes, and I don't really decide who is the varsity wrestler in each weight class. They decide. So they kind of wrestle each other in little mini tournaments, and we figure out who the best kid is. But I am the referee for those, and I'll just read my thing. It said, I found it very important to remain neutral while officiating matches, especially when a match involves one wrestler who works hard and is a good teammate, and another wrestler who goofs off or is not a good teammate. Another temptation for the bias in this situation could arise when a wrestler I've coached for a long time is competing against an athlete who is relatively new to the sport. In order to officiate in a fair manner and for the true varsity lineup to be earned by the athletes themselves, I have to remain unbiased as I oversee these competitions. And I can actually, there's a couple of times where that's actually happened, where a new kid or a kid that wasn't like a great citizen, was winning. And like, as I'm officiating or being the referee, I'm thinking, trying to think my way how I'm going to be able to make this work. And so I really have to be respectful of the kids' efforts and be a fair referee regardless of who's competing. That was the first thing I thought of when we were reading this section. That's it.
Right. Super interesting. My dad's a state champion wrestler, and then all of his sons wrestled growing up. I can totally see how that would be important. I've got mad at my fair share of refs, that's for sure.
Yep.
I do appreciate it, fair one. All right, so for mine, I guess I can read it. So I'm a tutor for certain business classes here on campus, and I've tutored some of them for about 2 years even. Going on the past 4 semesters even. And I've found each semester, it's, I don't know if you guys have taken the class, it's one of them that I've tutored for 2 years, it's B211, it's where you do capstone. Have you guys taken that class?
Yeah, it's a great class.
Yeah. Uh-oh, I think we lost him.
Yeah.
Should just wait for him to come back.
I think one of us could probably, or either Wes, you or Richard could probably start, and then when he comes back, we could let him cut in.
Okay. I can just share my example if you want. Mine was pretty simple. I just talked about how in trials, when you have a jury, if one of the members of the jury happens to know or be friends with someone who's being accused and tried, that they're usually released from the jury because they would be biased and probably not see or not accept the accusations and evidence as well as anyone else who didn't know them. So just in the name of fairness, they're released from the trial and replaced with someone neutral party.
Good. Do you want me to get mine?
Yeah.
Okay. So I did a little bit of different, because when we were going through the article and we were reading about things like ambiguity, attachment, approval, familiarity, discounting. I looked up. I just kind of looked up some articles because I wanted to just kind of see what was out there. And when we were reading about it, it talked about second. There was one of the things that said
Hey,
Hey.
oh, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. It just closed.
You want to go ahead and I was giving mine, but you want to go ahead and finish giving yours? I can wait.
Oh, I mean, I can go after you. That's fine. That was weird.
And you're like, hello.
I don't know. I hope it doesn't do it again, but go ahead.
So anyway, it talked about in here. It talked about escalation. So it talked about how it was natural for people to conceal or explain away minor indiscretions and oversights, and that it said unconscious bias may evolve into conscious corruption. Corruption representing the most visible end of a situation that may have been deteriorating for some time. It says it's our belief that some of the recent financial disasters we've witnessed began as minor errors of judgment and escalated into corruption. So I found an article, and it was about a guy. I hadn't really heard very much about it, but it was like a five-part story about this guy, and I pretty much stayed up and read all of it because I was so intrigued by it. But it was written in September 2015. It was called The Unraveling of Tom Hayes. And he was a brilliant mathematician and trader. He worked for UBS and Citigroup. And what he would do is he got sentenced to 14 years of prison time for manipulating the LIBOR, which is like the London banking rate. And so basically just talked about how for years traders had kind of nudged LIBOR, and they didn't really think there was anything wrong with it, and then it just kind of escalated over time. And then anyway, it blew up, and he was persecuted. He was prosecuted by the U.S. government and the English government for fraud and for antitrust violations. And so that was a good example of like unconscious bias in that, and the principle of like escalation, about how something little indiscretions over time can add up and turn into fraud. So that's what I did.
Cool.
Yeah, that the unconscious bias leading to conscious corruption. That's something I thought was interesting. Mm-hmm. There's I can't remember the actor's name. This movie came out a while back. You know, the guy that played teenage Anakin Skywalker in the Attack of the Clones Star Wars movie, and
Hayden Christensen,
Revenge of the Sith. So that actor played a guy in a different movie. I think it was called Breaking Glass, something like that. But Stephen Glass was a writer for an East Coast, just kind of like an opinion magazine. And it was kind of like the New Yorker, but a different magazine. And his articles were always like super interesting. And it turned out that a whole bunch of the stories that he wrote about, he had completely made up. Like he talked about going to a hacker convention. He talked about all these different things. He talked about corruption. He made up his own, to cover up one story. He created his own website to create this company. So he kind of started out just trying to look for interesting articles. And he ended up kind of starting to fill in gaps with his own information, and then just started making up completely false stories just so that he could have exciting stories for his readers and for the magazine.
And isn't it crazy?
Yeah. It was a true story too. But
Yeah.
Austin, looked like you found an office.
No, yeah, I totally went to a new space. I have no idea what's going on. I think the internet is bad in this building, so I went into a classroom and hopefully it doesn't shut down again. But did you guys already go through yours?
You can share your example if you'd like.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I don't know where it like cut off, but since I tutor this class or whatever, sometimes I pick. Naturally, I start to like certain students in the class, and it's not just with one professor, but there's multiple professors on campus that teach this class. So, I mean, at any given semester, there's like 200 students in this class where, they're in teams of 5 or 6, and just the way the teams interact, or if they bring me pizza on the times that we have labs or something like that, I start to like certain teams more. I get along with them. Well, it naturally makes you want to help them more or go talk to them more and like show them how to be really good at the program or whatnot. But I often have to keep in mind that it's extremely important to make sure that everybody's getting the same beneficial tutoring process and not just using all my time for one team. So I try to be selective as I go to the teams. Even the teams I like, I just say, well, like when they need to figure it out, they need to figure it out. I can't just sit there and give them answers, just because I like them. So, and I just found that. And so sometimes I'll see other tutors, and for 2 hours in the lab, they're only with one team the whole time. And it's just not fair to the other, 195 students that are also waiting for a tutor. So anyway, that was my example.
Good example. Everybody had a good example.
Alrighty, so when there's a question on the group page for this week that asks, how big of an issue is bias in everyday ethical situations?
Well, I think, because we talked about unconscious bias. I think after reading this article and everything, it made me more aware that I think bias is like everywhere. Like I think we're dealing with it all the time, and maybe not consciously. So I think it's pretty prevalent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I compare it to kind of to judging. I know they talk about judging at church a lot and in Sunday school, how you can't judge. And then there's a couple of behavioral studies that talk about that's really all we do constantly. It's kind of just how our brain works. As soon as we see somebody, even if we're not a judgmental person, like as soon as we see anybody, our brain kind of just makes a judgment as to whether we think we can trust them, whether we think they're a safe person or a dangerous person. Is that somebody I want to talk to or not? We kind of just make that. That was something that I had to learn how to work with on my mission. When you don't want to start judging people as to whether or not you think your time will be well spent talking to that person over another person when you just don't know their situation, who they are. A well-dressed person as opposed to somebody that's kind of sloppy looking or something. I had to kind of learn how to get over that and just figure out how to get past my bias and talk to everybody. But that's kind of getting away from the question. Ethical situations and bias.
In ethics, I feel like more than anything, especially in business, but there's not many degrees or majors where ethics is pushed so heavily, especially on campus, but you guys have seen through all the classes. If you look at it, if you look in accounting and economics and business, they drive ethics and morals, especially through church school, into us. And you look at these other degrees, and I'm sorry, but there's just not that many crooked engineers out there. You know what I mean? But for a fact that no matter what, we're going to have crooked businessmen. But through ethics, I think that's the reason, is because they're going to come to a point in their careers where, because of bias, they might push aside ethics. Like, to insider trading or something, because it's with my family, I'm going to push aside my ethics because I like them and I want them to make money. It's my nephew or whoever, so I'm going to give them tips on insider trading. And obviously that's illegal and it's not correct. But I think because of the chosen field of study that we're going into, that's when we're most compromised in ethics more than any other field.
Except for politics.
Yeah, politics as well. That's a good point.
One of the other points, it says the authors suggest that the status quo of how audit firms are hired, paid, and work with companies they audit results in bad audits. Do we agree? And why do we think when Congress passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, there weren't more radical reforms like the one suggested by the authors?
Well, the way that the author made it sound and the way they described it, it's understandable, kind of how they, like, it's not right, but I see from their point of view why they would have like just the slight incorrect reportings and stuff like that it talks about. And then, sorry, my mind's totally blank. What was the second part of the question? Sorry.
How come when Congress passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, there weren't more reforms in that trying to fix the whole hiring auditors issue?
Oh, well, to fix that, like they said in the article, you can't really fix that. You'd have to go in and change how the accountants and the businesses interact with each other.
Mm.
Just totally restructure that, which isn't something that the government can really go in and do in that way. And if they did, it would just totally change the way that everything worked.
Yeah, our free market system kind of dictates that you can hire who you want to hire.
I think it's interesting though, before Starbucks was created, that, I mean, obviously from an auditor, kind of how the story goes, but how the auditor looks at it is they have a reputation to uphold, and sometimes you have loyal auditors. They want the company to do well, and so obviously there was some investment, if you will, going on, and they were giving good audits so that the company would succeed, and they don't want it to come back on them. But then when Starbucks was initiated, they were now accountable all the way up to the CEO. Everyone was accountable, not just, oh, that was the accounting department, that wasn't me, I had no idea about that. Well, now everyone is accountable. So I feel that in a way it did kind of do that, where everyone is looking for honesty and integrity now because they know it'll come back on them. So their implementation and the hiring process of trying to find good accountants, I think, has increased because of it. In that sense, I do agree.
And I think
Yeah, it really does. It really does fall on the managers and the people in charge to make sure that the work with the auditors goes correctly and honestly. Sorry, Richard, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say that the thing that kept coming to me, kind of the concept of, Joseph Smith talked about, I teach people correct principles and they govern themselves. I think that ultimately, I mean, in an ideal society, in an ideal world, we all would self-govern. We all would, the less we govern ourselves, the more the government is going to govern us. And the less law-abiding people we are, the more we have to have, enforcement from an outside source. And so I think a lot of it boils down to policing yourself.
Yeah. Another question is, it says this article is specifically about auditors, but most of the studies are about human nature in general, and a few are specifically about lawsuits. Do you think the bias that was discovered for plaintiffs and defendants leads to a flawed legal system? Why or why not?
Well, that's a really good question.
Can you read the question one more time?
So it's talking about in the article. The article talks specifically about auditors,
Right.
but most of the studies that we went through talk about human nature in general, and a few were specifically about lawsuits. So it asks about bias that was discovered for plaintiffs and defendants leads to do so like in a trial jury, there can be biases that you have to fight against either towards the plaintiffs or the defendants. Does that lead to a flawed legal system? Why or why not? And then it says, since lawyers are advocates for their clients, how much do you think lawyers are affected by bias? And does this create a flawed legal system?
I don't know if I hope I'm understanding correctly, but I don't think it does lead to. I don't think in that aspect it does lead to a flawed legal system. I think that's necessary that the lawyers have to have a bias. That's like, for example, like in a civil defense, like a civil defense lawyer or something, he may not agree with the criminal, but they have to defend him regardless. But so they must create a bias in order to plead their case, essentially. But then you're going to have a lawyer equally on the opposing side that is going to tell you why not. And because of these equal bias, they fight against each other. It's like checks and balances, kind of make sure that he has his rights, but also if he committed a crime, that case should, in a proper legal system, win regardless.
Yeah.
I think, like in the case of a public defender, I think it's easier for a public defender who's just assigned cases to. I mean, at the end of the day, the defendant's lawyer, even if they're defending somebody, like if you're an honest person and you are representing a killer or somebody like that,
Yeah.
you don't necessarily. I mean, you can do your job without conflicting your bias or your morals, because it's really the defender's job isn't necessarily to argue that his defendant is innocent. It's to make sure that the prosecutor does their job and presents their evidence correctly, and that there's enough evidence. So you can kind of detach yourself just a little bit from that situation, not necessarily defend your person. Now, I think that the issue with the defenders falls into when there are people that are hired by organized crime, or there are guys that look for certain defendants that have money, that they know that they can defend them, make a good living, and maybe even get them off once in a while. There's a difference between that and simply doing your job honestly and just simply making sure that the prosecution presents their evidence properly.
In that case, I would agree.
Yeah. But I can see how bias definitely creeps in when there's a lot of money concerned and maybe the lawyer in question has flimsy morals.
Yeah.
I agree.
Can we think of situations outside of auditing where there are lots of opportunities for bias, and what could you do to change that situation?
Just in like everyday life, is that?
Yeah,
Like
I could be like, maybe I work in a classroom teaching, and in the area I live in, Sunnyvale, Cupertino, California, there's a lot of people from India. There's starting to become a lot of Israelis are starting to come over and work at Apple and Google. And a lot of those teachers, if they get a kid that has a certain kind of last name, move into their class like mid-school year, before even really meeting them, they immediately kind of formulate what that relationship's going to be like with that student, or what that student's going to be like. And it's not necessarily accurate, but some of these teachers have been teaching for such a long time that they've kind of gotten used to certain customs or certain attitudes from parents and students, and so they kind of just automatically make a judgment, or their bias takes over. And sometimes they're right, and sometimes they're not. But
right. I have a quick example that reminds me. So I'm a during the summer, I'm a tour guide in Alaska for a cruise line company. And it's funny because I will get a roster of all the names that I'm getting that are going to be on my coach and that I'm touring for. And I'll be taking them, from the cruise ship all the way through Alaska, through the wilderness. And the United States is the only culture that tips, if you guys didn't know that, but there's no other culture that tips. And the only reason that any other culture would tip is because they are in the United States and they've picked up that Americans do tip. So they will some occasionally. But if I start getting names that are from India or China or anything, I'm like, great. This whole run, I'm not going to get tipped. I already know. I already start preparing in my mind, like how I'm going to tour. I'm not going to put much effort. I'm just going to get to our destination as soon as possible and get them off my coach as soon as I can or something like that. So it's kind of the same situation. But even though I did that because I'm usually money driven while I'm up there, I still try my best. And occasionally, every now and then, I'll have a coach chock full of Chinese people that barely speak a lick of English. And they were sometimes my biggest revenue runs just because I don't know, I'd almost say it was luck, but because I continued to do my job and didn't involve bias, I just, in the gospel, I preserved or endured to the end and did it anyway. Sometimes the blessings were brought forth. So it's kind of funny.
Thinking of other cultures, I work in retail, so I
never liked tipping. Sorry.
I in retail. I sell furniture, and it's interesting when I've been doing this for 3.5 years, and when I first started, you're out there helping people, and then you come to learn really quickly that people who are from Asian cultures, or we have a lot of, like Micron is based here in Boise, and we have a lot of engineers that are from India or from other countries, and it's very part of their culture they want a dicker on price. They want a discount. They want, especially if they're Asian, they're like, you have special discount, and we have, our prices are already set, but I already mentally prepared that when I'm going to encounter somebody that's from Asia, I already know that they're going to ask for a special discount. So sometimes you'll just know that there's like a coupon, like a little coupon code for $25 or whatever that you can put on their ticket or whatever. And so you already just know, you're like, yep, a special discount just for you or whatever. You know how to deal with them. But I already know. And sometimes I just don't, like, I'll be in there all day long and I'll see somebody walking around and I already know that I'm not even going to approach them because I'm just like, I don't want to deal with it. And I'll go help somebody else.
Is anybody an accounting major?
I am.
I actually am as well.
So it asks, if you're an accounting major, what will you do about what you learned from reading this article?
Do you mind if I give feedback? So I just found my computer is about to die, so I'm going to try to give this last feedback, and then it might die. But I've definitely seen. I think about this actually all the time, and honesty and integrity is literally going so far nowadays. I have an interview with Goldman Sachs, one of the big four, just because on my LinkedIn profile it says how I strive for honesty in all situations. So the vice president of Goldman Sachs had contacted me and said I was intrigued by this and I'd love to talk to you more. So I get to talk to him tomorrow at 4:30 for an internship opportunity just because of that one reason. And he kind of explained already, he's not even a member of the church, but he just saw, he goes, you have no idea how much we've been looking for honest people to deal in this type of department. And so hands down, if you can show honesty and integrity in all situations and, without bias and have good morals and ethics, I think no matter what, the blessings will unfold and your efforts will always be returned. So.
That's cool. What about you, Wes?
Well, I can't really say it better than that, but I don't know. It just for accounting, you handle so many of the inside workings of the companies, and sometimes people won't even double check if you put something wrong. You could just mark something off and not worry about it. But you just have to tell yourself, and in any profession. You just have to tell yourself that you're gonna do what you know is right, not because it might always be the best for you. Because a lot of people now would just say, "Oh, nobody will ever know, and it will make me some extra money on the side or something like that," and just keep going with it. But you need to put what you know to be right first.
I agree.
Cool. So the last question asks, why do you think it's so difficult to overcome bias even when you know about it?
I think it's because we're human.
Sorry? Yeah.
Because we're human. I mean, we're going to always have that. We're always going to be, struggling with the natural man because we're not perfect beings yet. And the constant effort to remember and remind ourselves to, act without bias, or like recognize, okay, wait, I'm being biased to my decision, and maybe make a different decision, and practice charity toward other people.
I agree. It's like our natural man.
I think it's human nature to kind of become attached to, people that you like and want to give them the benefit of the doubt. And, when you get coworkers or people that you work with or work for, other companies that, you take a liking to them or they've been good to you in the past. And I can completely see how easy it is to start to give them the benefit of the doubt. And it can, if you're not careful, it can be easy to kind of lose your focus on how far that benefit of the doubt might reach.
It's a slippery slope.
Yeah, I think it's pretty natural. It's kind of that thing where the saying where you can't make fun of my brother, but I can because we're family. You're not allowed to insult my mom, but I can yell at her because she's my mom, right? It's just kind of a natural deal. Well, those are all the questions. I thought it was a good discussion. We have to write a paragraph saying what was the most important or interesting insight our group gained. Couple of the notes that I wrote down, Richard mentioned the unconscious bias possibly leading to conscious corruption, and the Tom Hayes story.
Oops, we lost Austin.
Sorry?
We lost.
Oh, yeah. It's probably his computer battery. Austin was talking about how the business world is looking for individuals who value honesty, integrity. It was mentioned the Joseph Smith phrase, teaching correct principles and allowing people to govern themselves, and the natural man. So we could probably, if you guys don't mind, I can formulate a paragraph using that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the quiz is going to be next week, so because we don't have to do a question, right?
I think said that we didn't have to.
Oh, he just sent an email, guys, saying that his laptop died.
Okay.
I'll just respond.
Yeah, that's all right. So, are there any other suggestions on what the paragraph could talk about?
I think those are all.
I mean, this time that we'll just finish it up without him, or what do you want me to say?
Yeah, I think we're just about done anyway.
Is he supposed to host next week?
Yeah, it would be, if he can, it'd be his turn. Otherwise, I think it would be Wes. Would it be your turn next?
I think it's Richard's turn. I hosted last week.
Okay, that's right. Yeah. So if he can, that'd be awesome. Otherwise, it would be Richard's turn.
Okay.
But I think he can be at his own place next week.
Okay. I just sent him a I didn't CC all of you guys on that. I just responded to him. Saying, looking at stuff like that. I think he's going to host next week.